What's up guys? Welcome back to the channel Hand Waving. Your friend Naruto Addict 2.0 is here again with a brand new Naruto fanfic that's going to change everything. A story where Naruto is betrayed and banished. But destiny has bigger plans for him. From exile to emperor, this is the journey of power, strategy, and love. Today's fanfic is titled, What if Naruto rewound the Chunin exams until he became Konoha's savior and won Hinata's love? Part 1. Lionheart. Nothing post-time skip applies. It never happened, it will never happen, and the junk Bakamoto made up about rules of how this or that worked do not apply. Kishimoto started with a good concept, then turned his own series into crap. It makes me wonder if he knows rolling on a social basis. It was the worst day for Konoha since the Kyuubi attack, the invasion by the hidden villages of Sand and Sound. Everything was chaos. Caught off guard and admittedly soft from years of peace, the people of Konoha were unprepared to be stabbed in the back by an allied village, or for the destructive return of one of their most powerful missing ninja, arriving at the head of a new band of followers. Into this opening, Orochimaru stabbed, gutting the village that was once his home, using his own sound shinobi and deceived sand ninja to sow destruction and chaos among his former friends and neighbors. Death and destruction was everywhere. It wasn't quite the end of the village hidden among the leaves. They would, in the normal course of events, throw off the attack and survive. But they would be weakened for some time to come, losing precious prestige and influence that cost them almost as dearly as the defending ninja who died that day. But something happened Orochimaru did not intend. While he was attacking his former teacher, intending to kill Sarutobi, the Hokage of Konoha, a young boy sheathed in the red aura of the Kyuubi attacked the barrier his faithful Sound 4 had erected around the two to isolate their epic battle. Thus begins our story. Naruto groaned, turning over in bed. The whiskered blonde boy blinked twice, coming more awake as he realized something. The last thing he remembered was charging at that wall of blue light, whatever it was, trying to get to the old man, to save him from whatever that long-necked guy was doing. He remembered hitting that screen, and then, nothing, just waking up here. Surprisingly, the young boy did not feel as awful as he somehow expected to. His body was fine, although his mind was decidedly not. There was an odd mix in there of the afterimage of the worst headache of his life, and a strange sort of tiredness, just like he was exhausted after a hard day, ready for a full night of sleep instead of getting up from one. Deciding that since no one would need him for anything after the fight the other day he could get away with taking a sick day, he rolled over and went right back to sleep, so tired that he didn't even pause to wonder about how the old man Hokage did in that fight the boy had tried interrupting. A few hours later his nap got interrupted, first by loud banging on his door, which he ignored by rolling over, then Naruto. Sakura slammed open his unlocked door, the lock was broken. Like almost everything else in the boy's run-down apartment, eyes wild with rage and her aura actually visible, so lost to her temper that she actually looked more like inner Sakura for once. Before the boy had a chance to sit up, blink, and wipe at the corner of his eye mumbling a puzzled, Sakura-chan. His teammate had stormed into the apartment and turned over his bed, flipping him out onto the ground in a pile of not-so-clean blankets and sheets. He got as far as blinking, sitting up from his new position, and muttering a puzzled, Saku, before the pink demon of fury had hauled him to his feet by the front of his nightclothes and was shouting into his face. Just what did you think you were doing, sleeping in today of all days? Waking up at last, the demon container wiped his eyes, unperturbed by her anger. Sakura was always angry at him, though today she seemed more than usual. Oi, Sakura-chan, he mumbled into her glazed fury. Did I miss something? You made us miss out on entering the Chunin exams. She shrieked into his face, shaking him feebly. As the rage-induced adrenaline left her weak limbs she dropped her hold on the boy's clothes. Mortified, the Kyuubi container saw tear tracks coming down from her eyes as Sakura teared up once more. Sasuke-kun was so disappointed. Naruto bounced back to his feet again. Oi, Sakura-cha. She pierced him with a gaze of pure, unadulterated hatred, stopping his attempt at apology and request for what she was talking about in its tracks. Don't you ever call me that again, Uzumaki Baka. The preteen girl shouted in his face, tears flying as she mixed both grief and anger. In fact, don't ever speak to me again. And with that, she fled crying from his room and his house, leaving the young boy in total puzzlement over her behavior, while her inner Sakura was doing flips and handstands over how much her Sasuke-kun would appreciate her punishing Naruto Baka for disappointing them. Head still aching and still tired, though not as much, but no longer disposed to sleep, Naruto started puzzling over her inexplicable behavior while he went about his morning routine. He was just coming out of the shower, having come up with no answers nor anything he'd done to upset her lately, when he stepped out, wearing a towel, only to see Sasuke standing there in his hallway, glaring at him in rage. Ignoring the anger as he always did, Naruto raised a hand and greeted his teammate happily. Oi, Sasuke-tem, what's up? His answer came in the form of one of the best right hooks the last Uchiha had ever thrown. Not even remotely expecting it, Naruto put up no resistance when his fellow member of Team 7 beat him to within an inch of his life. The loudmouthed blonde boy had never been subject to so much violence from this boy, who he'd often considered a friend, even a brother, and caught between his initial surprise and trying to keep his towel on, didn't put up too much of a fight. Finally, the brooding Avenger wore his arms out and left without once having said a word the entire visit, his knuckles split and bleeding, toes sore from too much kicking, and annoyed that Naruto had absorbed it all without dying. Naruto was left laying there on his floor in shock. Oh, the cuts and bruises went away so quickly he'd been healed of some before the others had fallen, but the shock of the brutality of the attack had left him astonished, and he lay there coming to grips with it. Sasuke-tem had done everything sort of drawing weapons or using jutsu on him. He'd never once seen him that angry. And Sakura-chan, too. What was up with them? What had he missed by sleeping in one day? Glancing at a clock, the village pariah rubbed at sores on the back of his head in confusion. Heck, Kakashi-sensei shouldn't even be to the group's regular meeting spot yet. What could have gotten them so upset? As if to answer his unspoken question, the rookie genin turned around and saw their teacher there, leaning against a wall in Naruto's hallway, his nose stuck deep in that orange-covered book he always carried. Oi, Kakashi-sensei. The battered blonde dove forward, scrambling closer on his hands and knees, trying to get some answers, only to be stopped by a hostile gaze once again. There was anger there, but mostly disappointment, through there was also some disgust, which, while Naruto was used to being ignored by his teacher, having his sensei be disgusted by him was a whole new realm of hurt. Kakashi snapped his book shut, uncoiling slowly to face his blue-eyed student. Naruto, you greatly disappointed your team today. I'd thought better of you. For a while I thought you understood how your role is to support your teammates. I was counting on you to be there to hold them together, so Sasuke could climb higher. Now you have failed when they needed you the most, and I can see that I made a mistake in letting you graduate. And with that the Jonin vanished in a swirl of leaves. The much-abused Naruto was nearly in tears from these repeated shocks, coming one after another. Suddenly he couldn't bear to be in his apartment anymore. It was the source of too much recent pain. Throwing on his clothes over still healing bruised flesh, he got out of there and began to walk around the city aimlessly, no real purpose or place to go. It was a bright, sunny day outside, one filled with many happy people. With the many visitors to town here for the Chunin exam, more crowds were out than usual to see the strange new faces and wonder at their guests. It was a happy town, a joyful one, well, when Naruto wasn't around anyway. He still got hateful glares wherever he went, but more importantly, it was a peaceful town. Even Naruto started to notice changes right away, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was he was noticing until he came upon one of the ninja he'd seen killed. It was a Konoha nin, and Naruto knew nothing about him, not even his name. They were not even acquaintances, however, he had seen the man die in gory and messy ways, then his body laying slumped on the ground. It had been a particularly graphic and unmistakable death, even for ninja. It was for that reason that it had stood out among so many, and a big part of why he'd remembered it. Startled by seeing that man alive, Naruto started looking around and saw that none of the other damage was visible. That had been a tremendous fight that had brought Konoha to its knees. The battle had scarred the entire town as jutsu-wielding ninja fought across the whole length and breadth of it, yet everything looked just fine. If there had been a battle here, there certainly was no trace of it. But how could that be? He'd been there during that battle, he knew it had happened. Naruto puzzled till his puzzler was sore, but he could not make any sense of it. He knew that those things had happened, but all of those thoughts fled his mind as he dismissed them, having seen a person who could probably tell him what was up with Sakura-chan. Oi, Ino, wait up. And the orange-clad boy ran over to where the blonde girl had been walking along proudly with her team. Fresh from the tests, and flush with their own success, Ino turned to face her caller simply radiating confidence, at least until she recognized who it was. Then a thin layer of anger overlaid her confidence. Naruto, she snapped, before the boy could get a word in edgewise. How dare you show your face after disappointing Sasuke-kun that way? The boy scraped to a halt and rubbed his cheek. Ino, what are you talking about? She rolled her eyes. Today was the first test of the Chunin exam, moron. Did you just forget to show up? Sasuke-kun wasn't able to take the test since his whole team wasn't there to support him. You are holding him back. HMPH. Maybe he should find himself another teammate, or a better team. Ino turned her nose up, gave a disdainful sniff, and turned away, walking off with Team 10 trailing along in her wake. Naruto just stood there looking gobsmacked. But wasn't that a month ago? He mumbled. Now Konoha's pariah had long ago developed an iron-hard skull, bull-headed determination being his sole survival tool in a village that hated him. Having been sabotaged by teachers and scorned by all who knew him, he had learned to dismiss anything he could not understand, as there was no person he could go to regularly to explain them or help him figure them out, and all too many people who'd be willing to deliberately add to his confusion. So, since most puzzles had no solution, at least to him, he'd learned to simply throw them out so he didn't waste any mental effort worrying about them. Still, as much as he tried to, today's events were a bit of a strain for him to just pass off as nothing. So it was that Naruto found his feet guiding him to the one place he could always count on for help explaining things he couldn't understand. The Hokage could not spare time to teach him all of the time, but he was the kid's one source of trustworthy information on things he couldn't otherwise understand, the only one before graduation who'd ever explain things to him. So he tromped into the Hokage's office and shot an arm up high. Oi, old man, how did your fight with Snake Face go? I didn't see the end of it. Sarutobi took his pipe out of his mouth and stared at the boy in confusion. He'd been expecting Naruto to begin pleading and whining over his failure at the Chunin entrance exam, not this. He'd already prepared a speech where he denied the boy a second chance to take this test, telling him how another 6-month wait would build his skills and character. Instead, Naruto seemed not to care at all. Then his question hit. I'm sorry, Naruto. I've not seen Orochimaru in many years. The Hokage tapped ash out of his pipe in confusion over how that question had come out of the boy's mouth. Huh. Naruto opened his eyes wide to blink in confusion of his own, then he stamped a foot down hard, forming a fist. Don't lie to me, old man. I saw you fighting him yesterday. He was there, all wiggly and with that long neck thing of his. You'd gotten trapped in this big, blue box and he'd gotten these guys growing trees and stuff inside while you summoned a monkey. Laying the pipe aside, Sarutobi carefully looked over the youngster. I'm sorry, Naruto, but I do not use my summons lightly, and there are no publicly known users of the wood techniques who remain in Konoha. The last was our first Hokage. So I would have known of any such goings on. You must have heard stories before having quite an interesting dream. Could it all have been just a dream? The boy wondered, scratching his head. Then his eyes widened in horror. But that means I missed my chance to become a Chunin. Ah, what a day to sleep in. Sarutobi chuckled. Don't take it so hard, Naruto. In another 6 months you may get another chance. You are still young, there are many opportunities before you. I'll tell you what, he took out a slip of paper and began to write a note. Take this to Ebisu, he is a special Jonin who teaches only the best. This will instruct him to teach you a jutsu. Numbly, Naruto accepted the paper and the accompanying instructions on how to find the special Jonin, then went off to find him. Having already objected once to this instructor, then failed to win in a contest in support of those objections, Naruto did not complain about having Ebisu as a teacher. They had begun the water walking training together, which had turned out to be useful. Besides, the boy's mind was numb from repeated shocks, so for once he simply did as he was told and sought out the older man. Sarutobi, watching in his crystal ball, was shocked by this behavior. Meek acceptance was not often a part of Naruto's character. So the Hokage supposed having lost his chance at the Chunin exam had hurt the boy worse than he'd thought. The demon container tracked down his new teacher in the forests around the training grounds, spending some time doing so as he had to find exactly where he was. There, he simply presented the note, and proceeded to stand there obeying wordlessly as Ebisu instructed him to do this, do that, lift one foot, assume taijutsu stances, and then finally list off the jutsus he already knew. Body switch, transformation, shadow clone, harem techniques, the boy replied woodenly, still in shock over it all, and forgetting to put toad summoning on his list. Ebisu sniffed disdainfully. 2 of those are useless, and the others are all basic, except for the shadow clone technique. You do not even say you have the basic clone technique, so you fail to master the essential 3. Still, the man pushed his small glasses back up his nose as he gazed off to the horizon proudly. I suppose shadow clone makes up the difference enough for you to be considered a rookie genin. But you are nowhere close to being Chunin material. Yeah, just teach me something, already. Naruto started to pick his nose, staring at the instructor sullenly, already tired of being yelled at. He'd already had enough of that for one day. Ebisu crossed his arms and gave him a dismissive snort. Harumph. Go walk up that tree. He pointed. Naruto did so. Hey, your chakra control is pathetic. Go walk on that stream. Ebisu ordered, pointing again. Naruto did so. Wasteful. You use 100 times the chakra that you need. Float that leaf above your palm. The special Jonin ordered. What are you talking about? The sullen genin groused. Smiling that he had found something easy to teach the young boy, Ebisu then started to explain the leaf floating exercise for training in chakra control, which he left Naruto to perform for the rest of that day. Late evening, finishing off with a dinner consisting of an enormous amount of ramen, the village pariah concluded what had on the whole been a very stressful and unproductive day, and went back to bed with most of his questions still unresolved, already long into the process of forgetting them altogether. Waking up early the next morning, Naruto blearily went through his ordinary routine before heading out to the forest to continue his training with the leaf floating thing. He'd been at it several hours, without much success, when all of a sudden he was lifted up by the throat by an angry Sakura who was practically breathing flames as she shouted, Naruto. Just what did you think you were doing, goofing off today of all days? Huh. Wah. Sakura-cha. His head was suddenly ringing as she'd just dropped and slapped him. Don't you ever call me that again, Uzumaki Baka. She shouted. In fact, don't ever speak to me again. You made us miss out on entering the Chunin exams. But, I thought that was yesterday, he puzzled, already confused as the half-dismissed questions from yesterday returned, full force, to his mind. Sakura just slapped him again as her answer, before stomping off, sure of the justice in her righteous fury, and that Sasuke-kun would be so happy that she'd helped punish Naruto for disappointing them like that. The blonde boy she'd left behind just stared after her in confusion, clutching the hand-shaped red mark on his cheek. Moments later, turning to face another sound he'd only just heard, the confused blonde called out, Oi, Sasuke-tem, what's up? This time the right hook wasn't entirely unexpected. When Kakashi came and broke up their fight, he gave Naruto a silent yet withering glare, then took the last Uchiha away for private training. Naruto stumbled into town in a daze, found Ino with her team where he'd last met her, received the exact same treatment and response, and wandered in even more confusion up to the Hokage's office, where Sarutobi once more took pity on the boy and gave him a note for Ebisu. The special Jonin was able to give him several pointers on his leaf floating technique, and after another day of training Naruto went to bed one very confused boy. Oi, Saku, Haruno-san, Naruto called out weakly, giving a half-hearted wave to his pink-haired teammate as she came skipping up to greet Sasuke. Sakura gave him a look filled with confusion that he'd switch from his usual intimate form of address to something so formal, but quickly figuring that if he was going to stop bothering her with his clumsy and unwanted crush, that was all to the good as it made it clearer to Sasuke-kun that he had no rivals for her affection. The pink-haired Kunoichi accepted the change in address and went to babble to her other teammate, leaving Naruto out in the cold, so to speak. The boy she was ignoring felt so confused he didn't know where to start. He felt burned enough by the one bad experience to not want to sleep in, and just confused enough by the other to check in at the testing center before he went off to train, and to his surprise, all of the Chunin hopefuls were gathering for a chance to take the first test. Naruto had a deeply ingrained aversion to thinking. Thinking about why the villagers hated him only made it hurt more. Thinking about problems when no one would ever give him an answer just got him more confused. But here was something he could not ignore, and it was driving him crazy. Happy to dismiss it all in spite of that, the blonde boy followed his two other teammates into the building, where there was a group of disguised Chunin standing by a door under an illusion, trying to turn the test hopefuls away. The boy watched, awestruck, as the fight between Lee and Sasuke happened once more, exactly as before, as the bushy-browed boy tried again, for the first time. To prove that hard work could beat a genius. The Uzumaki boy followed in an ever-increasing stupor as events turned out the same as before until they reached the testing room. This time he was in far too much of a haze to call out his challenge to the room, but still the silver-haired, glasses-wearing Konoha genin came up to offer them advice, and the rush attack from the sound genin happened just as before, with Naruto staring at it all as a dumbstruck witness, too shocked to move. By the time Ibiki came out and they all had the exact same seats as before, the demon container could no longer stand it. Standing up on his chair and placing one foot on his desk, he pointed to the head examiner and shouted, "You bastard. Nobody has to write down anything to pass this test. You've got it rigged so that anyone who agrees to take the 10th question wins." Ibiki, while both surprised and fuming inside, kept a calm facade as he looked down on his notebook and shouted a terse, "Team 7 fail." Naruto was still staring dumbly as the assistant examiners took him by the arms, dragged him to the doors, and threw him out. He was barely listening as Sakura shrieked, almost blowing out his eardrums, that if he'd learned something secret about the tests he should have kept quiet about it and not gotten them thrown out. Sasuke bruised his feet and hurt his knuckles trying to give his unresponsive rival another beating. Kakashi let it happen. Then he had a few words to say, adding his own lecture about keeping secret information secret so you could use it to your advantage, and not blurting it out in public so it couldn't do you any good. Still, at least this time Kakashi was a bit amused on top of his anger at Naruto for getting his team thrown out of the exams. Naruto was still gulping like a goldfish by the time they left him alone. "Everything," he finally whispered, long after he was all alone. "Everything is the same, nothing changes." Then he grew a wide, prankster grin, and his eyes came alight for the first time in days. "Unless I change it." He went off to see the Hokage and, sure enough, after trying and failing to explain what was going on to the one man he trusted most of all, he got another letter to Ebisu, who further refined his leaf floating technique with a few more helpful suggestions. With help like this he'd soon get it down. The boy was chuckling madly as he went back to sleep. Oi, Sakura-chan," Naruto called out happily, greeting his team in a new morning while standing in front of the testing center as all of the Chunin hopefuls entered. His hair was washed and he had on his best outfit. "Glad to see you decided to come." "Well, I wasn't about to disappoint Sasuke-kun. The pink-haired fangirl cried, rushing over to the object of her obsession to fawn over the brooding Uchiha. At first Naruto frowned, as that snub had hurt. Then he quickly smiled again, rubbing the back of his head while chuckling, before adopting a very obvious sly expression. Say, Sakura-chan, why do you like Sasuke so much? Why? Sakura shrieked, before bonking the blonde on the head. Why do you have to ask such a stupid question? He's a strong ninja, the top of his class. You think I'd go for a dead last like you when I could have someone like him? Suddenly she was back by the Uchiha's side, trying to take his arm so she could guide him into the center. Come along Sasuke-kun. We wouldn't want to be late for the test. Grumbling and rubbing his head, Naruto followed them inside. Author's notes. First off, I'm just plain tired of reading fanfiction, particularly Naruto fanfiction, where non-Japanese speakers show off their ability to quote Japanese words from their textbooks, and that practically insist on making you learn Japanese in order to understand it. There will be no Japanese words used if I can find an English equivalent. Do a search and replace if it annoys you that much. An exception will be made for certain name suffixes sometimes, as I feel those are easy and contain useful information. But I am not going to stress about using them right or often. On the other hand, words like ninja have been borrowed for so long they are effectively English. Secondly, Naruto's team were a little harsh on him, yes. My reasons for that, well, as with any time loop scenario, you've got to have problems to fix. So, in light of that, the reactions of Naruto's teammates may have been a little extreme, and they needed to be. However, in my mind none of them were out of character. Giving Naruto grief for a major disappointment. Oh yeah, but they all planned to make it up to him later, after he'd learned his lesson and suffered a bit. It's just that, in a repeating time loop, later never arrives. To put it another way, we have a fairly simple, bump, set, spike, routine going on here. To bump, you interrupt the course the story was originally taking. Its purpose is to give the character a, wait a minute. I didn't like that, some things got to change, moment, and yes, the purpose of those is to be unpleasant. That's why they make a character want to change them. To set, you redirect whatever random course you got out of your bump into a positive course of action. The aha moment that resolves the confusion and sets you up for the beginning of your plan, which is, sadly, all we were able to get to in this first chapter. Then the spike, which is your payload, where all of the good points come from, and really where you want to get as quickly as possible. Not so quickly as to make the story unbelievable, however. And as far as him training with Ebisu, yes, it is impossible to affect any physical change across the resets. You can even die, in such a situation, and wake up unchanged the next morning. However, for purposes of this story, chakra control is purely mental. Chakra itself has both mental and physical components, and let's be honest here, Naruto has frigging enormous body energy, amazing healing and hyperactive, etc., and practically zero mental. He has a surprisingly good brain, which intentionally or otherwise he has been conditioned not to use. So he'll even be able, potentially, to shoot his chakra capacity up to even more surreal levels, just by training up his mental side. As for techniques, things like shooting fireballs or teleporting from place to place, those are all learned skills, and as such he can acquire them. On the other hand, armed and unarmed combat are almost as much about reflexes as anything, which the body cannot carry over. So while Naruto can do himself some good there, do not expect miracles. Lastly, things like speed and brawn, endurance and toughness, which are pure physical conditioning, he won't be able to acquire at all in a time loop scenario. He's stuck with what he's got as far as those are concerned. So he could lift all of the weights in the world and it would not help him. Lionheart. Naruto was often a study in opposites. Though he could be dense at times, he was also capable of feats of amazing brilliance. The chief difference was the amount of encouragement he got. At the Ninja Academy his teachers had outright sabotaged his progress. The village shops sold him the worst quality gear for premium prices, and in all other ways did their level best to hinder his progress. On the other hand, the one time he'd felt a teacher was going out of his way to help him, Naruto had performed the mission he'd asked of him flawlessly, and learned a Jonin-level jutsu in a matter of hours. When he'd thought his team was counting on him, he'd participated substantially in the defeat of an A-rank missing ninja. He'd learned water walking in spite of having Orochimaru's extra seal messing up his already pathetic chakra control, and it was like magic. When people believed in him, he performed. It was that simple. He'd learn at rates the legendary Sannin couldn't believe, if only someone would give him a chance and a little bit of direction. And right now he was bored, sitting through the written test portion of the Chunin exam. The head examiner was trying to pour on the pressure, but Naruto already knew the secret of this test: anyone who agreed to take the final question won. So why bother stressing about the other answers? On the other hand, Hinata, the girl who sat to his right, was fretting visibly over his complete lack of concern for doing any work on the problems on the paper. Having already finished herself, her bloodline having gotten all of the answers for her, once again she whispered, "Naruto-kun, you can copy mine," and slid her paper discreetly over to help him read her answers. The blonde in question blinked at the ordinarily shy girl, stuttering out her offer to let him cheat, using her exam as an answer key. He relaxed as it struck him this was the second time she'd made that offer. He'd only turned down the first because he could sense one of the test proctors had noticed. Taking his feet off of the desk, where he'd been kicking back, loafing around, waiting for the test to be over, the boy leaned forward and whispered back. He glanced down at her paper and read off her name, Hinata-chan. Why would you do something like that? The girl blushed, cringing slightly away from him as she answered his question. Nah, Naruto-kun, she stammered, the test, it is important that you pass it. Team 7 fail. Team 8 fail. One of the proctors called off, and to his surprise Naruto found himself once more ushered out of the building, this time with his angry team accompanied by Hinata and hers, as well, although the latter seemed more confused about how they had been caught than angry. They were experts at information gathering, and had that whole test in the bag, every one of them. That was, Kiba and Shino, Hinata's teammates, were confused until Sakura started to yell at Naruto for whispering to Hinata during a monitored test and getting them all thrown out. That was worth some angry grumbling from Kiba and a very stiff stance from Shino, while Hinata blushed and rubbed her fingers together in the shame of it all. Naruto felt bad for the girl, so after Sasuke's attempts to plaster him were broken up by Kakashi, he went off to find her, but Hinata and her team had disappeared somewhere. Nothing left to do, Naruto went for another visit to the old man, and got another letter to Ebisu, where the special Jonin gave him a few more tips on the leaf floating exercise, and a comment about how he wasn't as lackluster as the teacher had suspected, given what he'd already heard of him. Another full day training on chakra control, and it was off to bed for Naruto. Two more repeats of that day had Hinata offering to help him each time. It was driving Naruto to distraction, as he'd finally noticed how much it upset the girl to see him not filling in those blanks. The thing was, she actually seemed to care about him passing the test. One of those contrasts about Naruto was that, while he could be a surprising blockhead and amazingly unobservant at times, at others he could also switch that around and notice things that no one else did, like his pointing out that Lee had bandages over his hands not as a fashion statement, but because his knuckles were split and sore from constant training, something that neither of his teammates had picked up on at the time. Now, stuck in this time loop, it was easy to focus in on small things. Heck, he could hardly help but do so. Since his efforts to get Sakura to divulge the secret as to why she thought Sasuke was so awesome were turning up nothing useful, he was beginning to notice other things. In the stress of his first time through this test, he'd not paid too much attention to Hinata's offer of help, and afterward he'd almost forgotten about it completely in the flush of success at passing. However, out of her repeated attempts to help, and his total lack of stress, knowing he did not need it to pass, caused him to become fully aware of something. She genuinely seemed to want to help. There were maybe 3 others who'd ever just wanted to help him for the sake of helping him. And what's more, he could see the girl suffering as she did, so this mattered to her. Why? He had no idea, but this was the 3rd time in a row now, and he figured it was not some trifling detail. Actually, his eyes teared up as her genuine offer of help finally penetrated as a real attempt to help him. This was not some random Konoha ninja assisting another in need, she wanted to help him. The dead last of the academy, the hated Uzumaki, the demon container of the 9-tailed demon fox, him. He actually wept out loud and got them all thrown out again. I. The next day Naruto skipped out on greeting Sakura, giving her a brief wave as he sought for the shy girl who kept giving up her own chance at success to help him. Not finding her at once, he decided to throw caution to the wind and blitz the whole area with shadow clones, hundreds of copies of himself going all over until they spotted the distinctive shy girl, who'd already gone past him and into the building. Sprinting to catch up to her so he could speak to her before the test and tell her not to worry, his clones got caught up in among the other genin and lost her. That led to a scuffle that nearly got him thrown out before the test, and Sakura only dragged him in at the last minute by his ear, ending up out of the place he'd always used in the line to receive seat numbers, and he wasn't even next to Hinata that time. Thinking he had it made, the orange-clad genin kicked back, put his feet up, and waited out the test, only to have Sakura opt out when Ibiki called for those who didn't want to take the 10th question. Naruto slapped himself in the face, having forgotten how stressed they'd all been that first time. He'd forgotten all about how Sakura had nearly dropped them all out so she could save his dream of being Hokage. Sasuke was coldly furious with the girl, saying some very hard and harsh things that probably ruined her dreams forever, except that she would recall none of it tomorrow. Naruto felt terrible about it all. Sighing, he left to go see the Hokage, got his letter, and went to meet Ebisu, no longer having to look around for him, going right to where the man was. After 5 days of studying that leaf-floating thing with Ebisu, the special Jonin had actually unknowingly passed him off on that, concluding that of the 3 basic chakra control exercises, leaf floating, tree climbing and water walking, his tree walking was the worst, and giving him some hints as to how to do it better, he'd left him to practice those all day, because the outcast youth needed better chakra control more than anyone. Ebisu was still haranguing Naruto that his basics were all out of whack. Of course, the special Jonin had no idea that he'd been giving him that speech day after day for most of a week now. So he also had no idea how much improvement the blonde genin had been making during that period. Of course, that was in chakra control alone, but that was still his worst area. But, when he had actual instruction instead of being ignored or ridiculed, the boy shone, accelerating at an amazing pace, so those extra tips were making a big difference, even though they seemed small to Ebisu. The next day Naruto made a careful note to give to Hinata before he even left his apartment. In it, he explained that he didn't need to write anything down to pass the test, so not to worry. Spamming the world with Naruto clones, the lad was able to spot Hinata before she entered the building, and the real one ran up to her and shouting, "Here!" shoved the note into her hands. He stood there grinning, sure this would solve everything, until his expression faltered. His grin slipped as he watched Hinata, holding the envelope with her name on it and staring at him, have all of the blood drain out of her face, tremble, then fall over backward in a faint. Kiba, her teammate, caught her. What happened to her? Naruto pointed, already panicking as Kiba scowled up at him. Stupid. Sakura hit him on the back of his head. She fainted. You go right up to a shy girl that's got a crush on you and give her a love note in front of everybody, and that's what happens. Love note. Crush. Naruto tried anxiously to process those words as he rubbed his head. Then he broke out into a wide grin. You mean she likes me? Like a boyfriend? Duh. Sakura hit him again, annoyed at this display of stupidity. Don't play dumb on me. Why else would you give a love note to her? It's not like anyone else would do anything but laugh at you. She's got to be the only girl on this planet that would go out with you. She's had a crush on you since we were all in the academy together. Don't tell me you never noticed. Kiba, by now, had looked away, hiding his anger at Sakura's words. But Naruto was glowing like the sun with a big, toothy grin. That was, until Hinata stirred a second later, whereupon she opened the note with a shy look of eager joy on her face, only to be crushed moments later when she read it. Naruto himself felt like the worst sort of heel imaginable as he saw her disappointment upon realizing that it wasn't a love note after all. Kiba helped her up, and the glare he gave Naruto as he helped the broken girl past spoke of his anger at Uzumaki for causing all this. Things then got worse as Hinata started to cry, sparing the boy she loved in vain one last pain-filled glance before rushing off to find privacy, the non-love note still clutched in a crumpled ball to her chest as she ran off. Naruto was left feeling like all of those villagers, glares of hatred had been right all along. He stood there, shoulders slumped, feeling like the worst sort of scum in the universe, all of his previous good feelings coming to crash down and burn on top of him. Sakura stood with him for a time, actually feeling some empathy, until Sasuke came to drag them all in. Hinata's team didn't come in to take the test, and Naruto almost didn't care when Sakura gave up on the 10th question again. Ebisu had him practice some refinements to his water walking this time. Hinata had offered to help him, a thing few people had ever offered to do. He could count those who had on one hand and still have fingers left over. That alone put her in a very special category. She was a precious person automatically because of that attempt. He'd very carelessly ignored it before, but stuck in his face day after day it was no longer something he could avoid paying attention to, even by accident. Now Sakura was saying that Hinata loved him, or at least liked him in a boy and girl kind of a way. Naruto had no idea how to respond to that. He had no idea how to start, even. He supposed he could write her an actual love note the next time, to make up for the hurt of this one, but, here the boy had to admit to himself that he had no idea what one of those would actually say. He'd never seen one before. Of course, he was Naruto. Tact, what is tact? Uzumaki. So he did what no one else was likely to do, and approached her directly the next day, before the test, and declared, "Oi, Hinata-chan, I was going to write you a love note, but have no idea what they should say. Any idea what I should put in it?" The poor Hyuga maid collapsed in an instant, blushing faint, and the crowds of collected genin broke out laughing. Baka. Naruto went down to twin thumps on the head from Sakura and Ino, who, after scolding him for being so tactless, dragged him off and gave him some basic, tips on the proper way to approach girls. It was the first time he'd had any information on courtship whatsoever, and it surprised him no end how very detailed was the subject. Hey, that's more complex than our academy lessons. He objected, once they'd fully overloaded him with suggestions in their enthusiasm to correct his crudity. Just do it, the two girls shouted, shoving him forward toward the Hyuga heiress, who by now had woken up and was being helped to her feet by Kiba. Hinata-chan, Naruto stuttered, coming to a stop before her and rubbing the back of his head, not looking directly at her. Would you like to go eat with me, after the test? Softly glowing a rosy pearl color, Hinata blushed and nodded, not trusting her voice, rubbing her fingers together all the while. Kiba just snorted at this display. This time the two genin teams walked together to the exam room, and Lee never made his attack on Sasuke. Slightly puzzled about that, Naruto got a new idea just as Kabuto was showing those ninja information cards of his, and asked, "Hey, what do those cards say about Hinata-chan?" The silver-haired genin gave him a sly look, and a glance over to Hinata, who was blushing up a storm, but the shinobi easily found their cards with the appropriate info. This is interesting. It looks like our little Hinata is heiress to the Hyuga clan, the most prestigious in Konoha after the Uchiha massacre. And what is this? She was the subject of a kidnapping attempt when she was only 6 years old. The hidden village of Cloud tried to abduct her for her bloodline. Decent skill at the gentle fist style, and a surprising number of successful missions for a newly minted genin of her age. Naruto's eyes were round as he looked over at the girl he'd always dismissed before, who was currently shrinking in on herself over all of the attention. This time they passed the test beautifully. Hinata was so embarrassed by the attention and the way her Naruto-kun was looking at her, that she did not press it when he turned down her offer of help. Then, Naruto was feeling confident enough to shout down the instructor, as he'd done the first time, so Sakura-chan did not disqualify their team. It was after that part of the test was over, Anko had come and gone and Hinata had left with her team, promising to meet him in an hour for lunch, that Naruto had an idea. Hinata worried so much about him that they'd failed time and time again from her offering to help him. So he ought to do something about that, and there, right beside him, was her completed test answer sheet. So, sliding it over, he began to copy it onto his. The test was already over, and they'd all passed anyway. He didn't care about score or anything. No, this was his sneaky plan. By memorizing her answers, he could have something to write down the next day. That way she would not be so concerned about him passing. He chuckled darkly until it was time for him to leave to go out to meet her for lunch. Naruto generally had one goal in mind when food was placed before him, and that was to satisfy his hunger. Consuming mass quantities was the goal, and doing so as quickly as possible, a habit he had picked up in his youth because of older kids who routinely stole his food. So he ate what he could get, as fast as he could get it, as a reflexive measure against that happening. But it was more than a little horrifying to Kunoichi with refined and delicate table manners. Even Sakura, who had tagged along with Ino and a few other curious Kunoichi to see this first date, and who could be called refined and delicate only in comparison to a gorilla, found herself appalled by the way Naruto ate. And she was not seeing it up close for the first time. Hinata, on the other hand, was, and although she'd been looking forward to this date for as long as she could remember, was a bit pained and winced at the animalistic manner in which Naruto consumed his lunch. Fortunately, he raised his food-covered muzzle to ask Hinata why she wasn't eating and caught her look of horrified chagrin. She tried to hide it, smiling weakly and picking up a morsel of her own meal, but her dismay was plain. That was when Ino and Sakura decided to intervene, and both together leapt in and dragged him away for a quick, yet thorough, scolding about proper table manners, ending with, "The way you eat reflects on how you feel about those around you. If you eat like an animal, you're saying that no one around you is worth being nice to. So eat like a gentleman, or else she'll think that she isn't important to you." Shoving him back at the table, Naruto tried to remember the information surge and pluck out the bits he needed to finish his meal. Hinata was nice about it, and plainly grateful that he cared enough to try and be better for the remainder of their meal together, but just as plainly he'd already ruined her dream date for her. She left the table with polite thanks but unhappy looks, leaving Naruto alone to once again feel like a positive schmuck for upsetting her, especially as he was trying to be nice and make her feel better over an incident she could no longer recall, where he'd first screwed up with that note thing. Now his resolve only crystallized and grew stronger. He would make it up to Hinata. Both for the note misunderstanding, and for ruining this date. The rest of that day passed rather unproductively. The old man wouldn't give him a letter to Ebisu, because he hadn't failed the Chunin exam yet and so didn't need to be cheered up. When he sought out Ebisu on his own, the special Jonin wouldn't teach him anything. So, frustrated, he went back to the Hokage and asked how you learned to eat so you didn't hurt a Kunoichi's feelings. Sarutobi was so surprised by the question he actually laughed out loud. Then he had to have a full explanation, of course. At the end of which, merrily smoking his pipe, the Hokage had suggested that if he wanted to learn how to impress a Kunoichi, one of the best instructors for that they had was Kurenai, Hinata's Jonin instructor. He even wrote Naruto another letter of introduction. The boy bounced merrily away to go find the Jonin, which took a long time, but when he did she was a little unhappy with him, making him suspect she knew about his badly failed date with Hinata-chan. Still, she agreed to teach him all the same, but while the blonde did his best to absorb what she said, the lecture Kurenai gave him was all way above his head, relying on him already understanding basic stuff he'd never heard of, and sounding about as complex as rocket science. It made the Jonin-level shadow clone technique seem about as complicated as a line drawn in the sand. What did it matter what clothes he wore? Or how he smelled? He smelled just fine, thank you, having already bathed today. Breath mints, flowers, what did those matter? Still, she said it was important, and the Hokage said she knew this subject better than anyone he had to teach him. It all seemed rather odd to him, though. But the worst part was she'd loaded him with so many specifics when he had no idea of even the most simple basics. Stuff like how to smile and comport himself. He had no idea how to smile, he just did. And all the stuff about fancy restaurants. He'd never been inside of a fancy restaurant in his life. They'd never let him in. He'd taken Hinata out to eat ramen at his favorite stand, just like he ate all of the time. No, the talk with Kurenai only multiplied his confusion, and Naruto went to bed a very unhappy boy. The next day found him up and already at the testing center before he realized that he was the only one there. None of the other Chunin hopefuls had shown up at all, which blew his mind as he'd grown to expect it. He waited for an hour before a hot-headed Sakura came back to scream and shout at him for not having been at the Forest of Death on time for their team to enter, and losing them their place in that test. Sasuke was even angrier with him than before, and Kakashi gave him that same, "I'm disappointed, you should never have been allowed to graduate," lecture. Confused and miserable, Naruto made his way over to talk to the Hokage, got a note to see Ebisu, and spent the rest of that day practicing chakra control. The next day, he was up and all packed and ready to go to the Forest of Death, only to have Sakura seek him out a couple of hours later to shriek at him about missing their chance to take the written test. Sasuke came to try and beat him up later, and Kakashi gave the same speech over again. Then it was back to chakra control with Ebisu. The next day, early in the morning, Naruto spammed clones all over Konoha to find out where everyone was gathering, and met them all at the exam center for the written test once again, same as always. So why had that one morning been at the Forest of Death? Author's notes. Well, a hearty thanks to all of you who reviewed. I wish there were more, but isn't that always the case? Lionheart. The orange-clad Uzumaki was very used to dealing with life by the seat of his pants, reacting to things as they came at him and living a life free of worries or concerns about trivial issues like tact and timing. Well, guess what? That all came to a screeching halt as he discovered he was trapped in a time loop. It's difficult if not impossible for a person to have an unplanned reaction to something he knows is going to happen. Especially when it happens the same way over, and over, and over again. Impulsive reactions don't happen anymore in that case. Recklessly charging ahead filled with passion only worked when you could feel passion over something. Having seen the same thing happen countless times kinda took the bite out of it, and knowing that however it turned out made no difference in the morning make reckless fury and passion almost non-existent no matter how willing you were to summon them. No, it was the sort of situation that demanded carefully thought out plans. When this happens, I'll do that and see what happens, was the least of the strategies that could be employed to learn from the situation. Far more valuable was deciding what goal you wanted to pursue, then going for it. Being caught in a situation where careful memorization and planning made the only difference was both torture for Naruto, and the best thing that could possibly happen to him, forcing him to put his disused mind to work and at the same time training him to effectively use it. The demon container was, by sheer trial and error, learning the scientific method by simple, practical experience. I want this to happen, and I believe that it would result from my doing that. No. Well, then maybe this other. It had taken him several attempts, but he had successfully memorized the answers for the written portion of the Chunin test. Now Hinata no longer worried about him failing. No, now he had to worry about something worse. Every time they got through the test she'd ask him how he did it, admitting that she, herself, had to rely on her bloodline technique to spy out someone else's answers. Every time he came up with a lie about how he'd spied them out himself, she'd grow excited and ask for more details, and always grew so disappointed when his clumsy structure of lies collapsed and revealed he'd been fibbing. Telling the truth was almost worse. If he told her how he'd memorized the answers, she'd ask how he knew them beforehand, then he'd be stuck either in another haphazard structure of lies she'd uncover through interested and eager questions, or a truth that she would not believe, one that made her feel he was not only lying, but trying to hide something from her. Either way, his clumsy attempts at explanations hurt her. Hurting Hinata made Naruto feel terrible. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized how important he was to her, and the more of a cad to shatter her illusions of him. So, in desperation, having freshly come from a branch of one of those conversations where Sakura had been boasting over how she'd solved it all herself, without cheating, as a way of pointing out to their teams how much smarter she was than Naruto, before immediately asking Sasuke for a date, the blonde genin had gone off to find Iruka. On locating his old teacher, the boy had shoved the test paper in his face and demanded, "Show me how to answer these problems." Chuckling, his old academy instructor did so, starting at the very beginning and leading Naruto through step by step, and confusing him to death not 10 seconds into the explanation. Seeing that, they started over. Naruto's brain hurt, and he was concentrating as hard as he knew how. The lessons took forever, going over the most basic parts of the easiest problem repeatedly, but slowly how it all worked began to take root. The next day, he was boasting to Hinata that he'd solved them himself, only for her to confess, shyly, that she'd only answered them by cheating, then asking him for help in understanding them. After floundering around for a bit, he went back to Iruka so that he'd look less of a fool to Hinata. And, well, the more he knew the more she asked and the more he had to bug Iruka to help him understand them, until Naruto had the ability to pass that test without having memorized the answers. A good thing for him was he had all of the time in the world to get it right. A bad thing for his immediate plans was that Iruka was a teacher, and as such he had no intention whatsoever of taking any shortcuts. He was not out to train anyone to solve only one problem, he was out to get them to have the concepts down, so they could solve any and all like them, and in some cases know the history and background behind them, which led into all sorts of closely related issues which had to be discussed in detail. So in spite of himself, Naruto was finally picking up some portion of an official shinobi education. Soon those conversations with Hinata were growing so long Sakura was overhearing them, and hearing Naruto talk about those subjects like he knew anything about them first got met by disbelief, so she pressed him, and when he could answer successfully he impressed her. Naruto liked impressing Sakura, and nothing he'd ever done before had done it. He also found it impressed Iruka and Hinata, too. Unfortunately for him, he liked it so much he couldn't help but lunge ahead for more, so did some extra studying just to have verbal ammo for impressing them further. Only this backfired from the start, as each tried to test his knowledge of certain subjects he hadn't studied, just to determine the breadth of his surprising education, and he kept floundering as they kept hitting topics he hadn't studied yet. Once Sakura hit a subject he knew nothing about, she was smug, having validated her opinion of him as a moron, which he hated, but once Iruka found an area of ignorance he was disappointed in Naruto, which the boy also hated. And both were in the habit of testing topic after topic until they found something he didn't know about, not maliciously, just out of disbelief. "You mean you actually know something? You were paying attention when we talking about, well then what about? Etc., etc., etc." Having found something they never supposed, Naruto's hidden knowledge, they kept probing to find the ends of it, and naturally he kept expanding it as they came up with questions concerning things he didn't understand. Naruto liked impressing people, and didn't get to do it nearly often enough. Soon he found that the more he knew the more he impressed those three, triggering a near-endless cycle, as pretty soon Sakura and Hinata were expecting him to know things in the later parts of the exam. In the forest, his teammate would quip things like, "Oh, Naruto can find those. He was just telling me about the properties of certain mushrooms," and so forcing the boy to learn yet more. But that was getting just a wee bit ahead of our story. Not long after he had started to memorize the test answers, Naruto came up with why his endlessly repeating day had advanced to the forest of death at once. It was simple. Every time he passed the written test, the next day found his personal timeline actually advancing one day. On days when he failed any part of the Chunin exam, he'd wake up the next morning starting it all over at the beginning again. That much he was able to figure out, and it wasn't like it was easy to miss, since it started occurring regularly once he'd figured out the hurdles to pass to get by the written exam. From there it was an easy guess that to get out of this cycle, all he'd have to do was pass the Chunin exams in their entirety, and probably he'd have to do something about the invasion, too. The last was even more of a sticky problem than the first, and the first was no picnic by itself, either. It surprised him, going over it again and again, just how far he'd gotten the first time on sheer luck, when that luck was most definitely not going his way on any subsequent attempts. Any simple thing seemed to trip him up and get he and his team failed. Well, I don't suppose you could call being killed by Orochimaru simple, but when they entered the forest, it almost invariably happened that one of them would get killed by that amazing missing ninja. Naruto, quite frankly, had no idea how they'd gotten by the first time. It had all been done on impulses which he could not recall, so he was stuck trying to do it over again, and somehow he kept messing things up to where the snake Sannin would kill him, or kill Sakura, or kill Sasuke, or all of them. Waking up after dying was a shock the once, but after that it quickly grew fairly routine. You did it frequently in battle with a legendary missing ninja. After having been stuck in a day-and-a-half loop for what felt like months, the blonde demon container had to admit at last that nothing he did seemed to be able to get he and his team by the amazing snake guy with his hickey of death. It didn't matter if he fought, tried to evade the Sannin or spammed the world with clones disguised as his team and raced toward the tower, one of his team would always die, and it was usually him, which sucked. So it was time to consider other options. Naruto's usual approach to his day had settled into something of a routine. In the morning of his first day he would ask Hinata out, and after the test they would go out to eat together, where several kunoichi would hang around and watch them, at first in disgust, but as he improved later in giggling glee. After lunch he would get himself scolded by Ino or Sakura on whatever he'd done wrong, until those two couldn't think of anything, and both girls had begun looking at him with their jaws hanging open. So he'd begun to ask questions of the other kunoichi present, until he was fairly sure those dates were going okay. Okay, however, was not enough. So after those meals he'd pester the Hokage to introduce him to Kurenai, whose lectures had started to make sense. It felt great to the genin to actually start to be able to get a handle on something. And though the restaurants progressed in quality, none of the ones that would let him in the door were very good. So for the moment he was stuck, without a good idea how to improve those, and Hinata-chan kept nervously fidgeting during those meals, anxiously watching their audience. It was something he'd have to work on, as he wanted those dates to go well. After his dates with Hinata, Naruto generally had a conversation where he impressed Iruka, Sakura or Hinata with his hidden knowledge, and then spent the rest of that day studying what they'd asked about that he didn't know yet. The next morning, they'd go to the Forest of Death, someone would get killed by Orochimaru, and he'd start all over again. On days when he wasn't the one dying, he'd often leave the forest and try to get someone to train him, but people were so upset over the news of Orochimaru's return and busy dealing with it that no one could spare him any time. After having exhausted all of the ways he could think of to escape or defeat the snake Sannin, and coming up with nothing that worked, Naruto decided that a change was in order. And what change he used was based on one of the standard shinobi sayings he'd just recently memorized: know thy enemy and know thyself, and you need not fear 100 battles. Know thyself but not thy enemy, and the outcome is always in doubt. Know neither yourself nor your enemy, and defeat is certain. Well, Naruto figured he knew himself pretty well. After all, what was there to know? And he was the expert on him anyway. That made it pretty obvious what he had to learn. So, the next morning of the written test, he went into the test center as usual and shouted, "Oi! Kabuto! What do those nin cards say about Orochimaru? The silver-haired genin blinked several times, as did his fellows, but withdrew the appropriate information card anyway. The legendary Snake Sanin of Konoha, now an S-rank missing ninja. One of the strongest ninja ever to live, he is Kage rank in most areas, but his specialty is ninjutsu, and his stated goal is to learn all of the ninja techniques in the world. I don't know much about why he was thrown out, or his missions, but his Jonin instructor was Sarutobi, our current Hokage, and his teammates were Jiraiya, the Toad Sanin, and Tsunade, the Slug Sanin. That's probably all we'll need to know if there are any questions about this historical figure. Huh, I didn't know the old pervert was a teammate of the tongue freak, Naruto mumbled, causing several of those around him to face flop. And I'd never heard of this slug lady. Do you think either of them could train me to beat up old Snake Face? Of course not. What are you thinking? They are the legendary 3 Sanin. You're nothing but a dead last. Don't ask such stupid questions. Sakura lost her temper to shriek at him, bonking him on the head for such presumption. Kabuto looked on with some amusement, folding away his nin cards. I don't think any of them would be willing to train you, Uzumaki. But supposedly, the 3 Sanin are fairly evenly balanced. According to what I've heard, at the time he left, Jiraiya could still beat Orochimaru if they fought, but his toad summons would be beaten by Orochimaru's snakes. Tsunade would have lost in a fight with him, but her slugs could beat the snake summons. So really, it would take 2 of them to beat the third. But it doesn't matter anyway. After Orochimaru left the village, the other 2 disappeared also. Huh, Naruto almost blurted out that the old guy was in town right now peeping on women's bathhouses. He knew, one of his clones had run into him one morning while searching for Hinata. He spent the next few days seeking out the old pervert, only the old guy was so reluctant to teach him anything that they spent the full day arguing about it and Naruto didn't learn anything. In desperation, Naruto began to fail the written test on purpose, flipping off the instructors, obviously copying off of others, and as that grew boring, he began to grow steadily more outrageous, climbing up on his desk, dropping his pants to moon the entire room, with the test answers written on his bum for good measure, and at last, opting to follow a suggestion given by one of the girls who'd observed their dates, turning to Hinata and loudly suggesting, "Hey, Hinata-chan. Let's make out." After her stunned, rosy, shy and nearly silent exclamation of, alright, he then proceeded to kiss her before the audience of genin, causing Sakura to rise up in her seat, face flushed and vein throbbing, to shout at him. Naruto. Don't do that here. Then her jaw dropped as Naruto did so anyway. It wasn't a very good kiss, but Hinata started to enjoy it. When the pink-haired demoness started to shout for them to stop it, however, Team 7 got thrown out. Naruto's purposes in flubbing the test deliberately were easy enough to describe. The first was to get in some sparring with Sasuke, who'd try to hurt him for having failed so deliberately, and learning to predict and evade those blows was always interesting until he got upset enough to turn his Sharingan on. But mostly he did it because, when he failed the test, Sarutobi gave him a letter to give to Ebisu, who'd teach him something. The special Jonin wasn't on a level with the Sanin, but neither was Naruto, and the blonde boy was just getting sick and tired of asking the old pervert for help, only to be snubbed in reply. The old guy wouldn't even let him sign the Toad Scroll again, and without that Naruto couldn't summon any. He was so angry he'd forgotten how he'd convinced the old guy to teach him in the first place, by adopting his technique to turn into a pretty girl and ask nicely. So he was left with Ebisu, who was clearly second-rate by comparison, but still much better than training on his own. So he filled his afternoons and evenings with training under Ebisu, even going so far as to not walk somewhere if he could run on the walls, and floating a leaf above his head while others were talking, just to fill in the corners and take advantage of all the spare moments during his dull repeating life. Naruto had long since lost count of the days, he'd not paid any attention to counting them in the beginning anyway. But he guessed it was on the order of a couple months or so before Ebisu pronounced his chakra control decent, almost average. It is not your worst flaw, which is not what I was expecting given what I'd been told, and proceeded to teach him something else. The blonde genin got all excited at that moment, but what Ebisu taught turned out to be the basic clone technique, not refinements to the shadow clone, but the ordinary academy-level ninja technique everybody had to learn. The boy groaned, but persevered. By now Naruto had discovered through hard experience that the easiest way around an obstacle was sometimes through it. It was just easier to learn a basic something than it was to argue in favor of getting something cool and useful, because he could either spend a whole day arguing, and learn nothing, or just grit his teeth and learn it, then the next time prove he knew it so he could learn something else instead. That cycle had happened several times during his chakra control training. True to form, Ebisu wouldn't teach him anything else until he had the basic clone technique mastered, and then refined up to a level where it was almost impressive. At first Naruto hated spending time on his worst technique when he could have been doing something useful instead, and only put up with it because that was the only way he'd found to get the special Jonin who was his teacher to move on. But after a while Ebisu explained how a smart ninja could use both together. A shadow clone was solid but vanished after the first hit, while normal clones, being just illusions, couldn't do much of anything but take hits. And they wouldn't vanish when struck, so could take blow after blow if you could trick an enemy into wasting that much attention on them. So if he was just going to use them for target practice, or as distractions to draw fire, which was, admittedly, most of what Naruto'd already used, clones for ordinary clones had a place, especially if he mixed ordinary and shadow clones into a bunch, so an enemy couldn't know which were solid, and could hurt them, as opposed to those that were mere illusions and couldn't be disrupted by something so simple as a blow, but could otherwise be ignored. So the shadow clones would last longer if they were mixed in and among the ordinary clones, not granting an enemy a clear idea of which to strike in order to take out the dangerous ones. Thus, between them, they'd cost an enemy more time and effort dealing with the distraction. Convinced of the utility of this strategy, Naruto practiced and practiced until he could perform both ordinary and shadow clone techniques so close to each other they appeared in the same puffs of smoke, and with illusionary ones mixed among solids until there was no way of telling which was which. Ebisu even pronounced it a potentially effective battle strategy, capable of being a useful deception, sowing confusion as well as causing damage. The next time he tested this against Orochimaru it was true, but pointless, because as soon as the snake Sannin realized that was what he was facing, he threw a massive, wide-area jutsu that destroyed everything around them, and in the process killed all of the clones, and Sakura, once again causing their team to fail. Carrying Sakura's broken, bloody body out of the forest of death, for he forgot how many times had kind of dulled the blonde's reaction to it. They took her to the Konoha morgue, and the blonde genin had the appropriate forms and paperwork filled out to inform her family and so on even before the door had finished swinging shut behind them. They were, it must be admitted, far from the first or only genin team there. Seeing as how the morgue was attached to Konoha's general hospital, they had all of the usual around-town accidents to take care of, training accidents from newly minted genin all of the way up to a young and foolish jonin who nearly burned her own face off, through chronic ailments like that Hayate guy's coughs, and the expected serious injuries and deaths caused by the rather extreme second test of the Chunin exam. It was a busy place, and Naruto was out of there before Sasuke had even sat down on a convenient bench to wait for them put the girl's body into a cooler for later autopsy. Uzumaki, on the other hand, knew he'd be seeing her again tomorrow. Oh, he'd cried for her once, twice, he forgot how many times, even hugged her the next day until she'd smacked him, but she died so often in those fights it just didn't affect him anymore. He'd died more often than she did, anyway, and she didn't get worked up over it the next day. Of course, she didn't remember it, but his emotions did not care about that. Emotions never do. No, he had stuff to do. Sakura was dead, which meant his team had failed. The times it was Sasuke's body in there he'd stick around to comfort Sakura, which was probably the only time she'd let him hug her without beating him for it, but since it was Sakura, the Uchiha would just go on brooding as usual, though, to be honest, it was maybe at a slightly more intense rate. At least she hadn't choked to death on her own blood this time. Those were always horrible, especially the look in her eyes as it happened. And it always made him feel so guilty, every time she looked so surprised that he wasn't reacting more strongly to her grisly demise. Shuddering at those memories, Naruto skipped along toward his destination, a place he had been many times, but only just begun to appreciate, the Konoha Public Library. Under disguise, of course. They'd never let him in otherwise. They had information on Orochimaru there. Oh, none of the classified stuff, but the publicly available information, which included all of the stuff Kabuto had said about him, plus some other facts and details. Things like the names of his old students. Mizuki was one big surprise there. Naruto knew he'd been a traitor since he'd tricked him into stealing the scroll of forbidden seals. Another name had been blotted out of the one book on the Snake Sanin's Genin team Naruto had been able to find. But the last was still around. Old Snake Face had left his one-time apprentice in town, a special Jonin by the name of Anko Mitarashi, the very same Anko who was proctor for the second test of the Chunin exam. It was amazing what you could read from books. Creating hundreds of shadow clones, the kid began to look for her. Luckily for him, he was early enough she had not yet been informed of Orochimaru's return to town, and so he found her outside of the forest of death-eating dango, and throwing the empty sticks to a tree where they embedded in the symbol for Konoha, a leaf. Rushing up to face her, Naruto pointed a finger at the woman and shouted, "I need you to train me." Anko actually chuckled. "Oh, failed already? I guess you do need training. But why do I need to be the one to train you, Breathing heavily from his run, Naruto panted, "If you do, I'll dedicate my life to defeating Orochimaru." At this the special Jonin actually quirked a brow in interest. Oh, she rolled the idea around some in her mind, concluding it could actually be useful to have some help when she went after the old bastard. So she smirked, "Okay, kid, you've got my interest. Tell me what you know already. We'll see where we go from there." Still panting from his long run, the boy nodded and declared, "Body switch, clone, transformation, shadow clone, and harem techniques." Abruptly the special Jonin's interest turned to amazed disgust. "That's it? How the blank did you even get in the Chunin exams? Forget it, kid. You'd never survive an encounter with the old bastard. Come back when you're older, and at least be sure to have some useful techniques next time." "I already survived one fight with him earlier today," the boy shouted, but this had the opposite effect than intended, getting her to abruptly demand where, then rush off to search for her old master herself. None of his arguments swayed her, not even when he had a repeat of this same encounter before entering the forest, and without mentioning her old teacher. Sadly disappointed, Naruto again started flubbing tests on purpose to go back to Ebisu, who so far had been the only teacher he could count on. Well, there was also Kurenai, but he could still hardly understand what she was saying half of the time, and he didn't understand how anything she said was going to help him defeat Orochimaru in any case. Not that he could afford to get better clothes than he had on, anyway, even if they did what she said they did about making girls like him more. How was that going to matter, anyway? So, getting another letter from Sarutobi, the demon container once again ventured over to where Ebisu would be, and once more submitted himself to the special Jonin's tests to gauge his present skill level. His spirit soared when, after submitting to the battery of demonstrations he required, the glasses-wearing special Jonin once more announced they'd be working on a technique. Then Naruto slammed his face into his palm when Ebisu decided that what he needed to do was bring to full mastery his offensively crude body switch, also known as the replacement techniques. Lionheart. I. Today is a day for deeds of greatness. Naruto declared to the sky from atop the Hokage monument. Then, turning around, he addressed his army of shadow clones. "Are you ready then?" "Yes," came the responding roar of 400 throats raised in unison, paint brushes held high aloft. "Forward!" the real one shouted, pointing off the cliff. With a roar, they surged ahead, Naruto in the lead, racing off the top of the mountain to run down the face of it, feet sticking to the side. And, just as fast as a waterfall or a curtain being dropped, the entire Hokage monument got painted in brilliant shades of red, yellow, blue, white and orange. I. Hey Sakura. The orange-clad ninja cried out to his teammate just before the first test started. I bet you're going to stand up, or shout, or do something stupid to get our team thrown out of this test. Naruto. The annoyed pink-haired Kunoichi shouted. I would never do such a thing. The blonde boy folded his arms. I said I'd bet you, Sakura-chan. How about, if you do, and I win, then you have to give up on Sasuke. But if you don't, and I lose, I don't ask you out anymore. No way. I would never bargain away my relationship with Sasuke, even on a sure thing like that. She shouted, then turned to bat her eyes to her crush. You see, Sasuke-kun. Nothing can tear us apart. The last Uchiha rolled his eyes in disgust. I. Hey Sakura. The orange-clad ninja cried out to his teammate just before the first test started. I bet you're going to stand up, or shout, or do something stupid to get our team thrown out of this test. Naruto. The annoyed pink-haired Kunoichi shouted. I would never do such a thing. The blonde boy folded his arms. I said I'd bet you, Sakura-chan. How about, if you do, you ask Kiba out instead of Sasuke at the end of this period, and if you don't, I'll start asking Ino out instead of you. That's disgusting. Go out with that hairy animal. I'd rather die. Kiba, who was standing nearby, cracked his knuckles and bared his fangs, growling angrily, that can be arranged. I. Hey Sakura. The orange-clad ninja cried out to his teammate just before the first test started. I bet you're going to stand up, or shout, or do something stupid to get our team thrown out of this test. Naruto. The annoyed pink-haired Kunoichi shouted. I would never do such a thing. Okay, let's bet. Say you do, then you have to wear whatever outfit Ino picks out for the rest of the day. If not, then I'll wear the same thing she'd picked out for you for the same period. You're on. Ino was also grinning. Oh, I've got just the outfit, too. Quiet down. Ibiki entered the exam room, explained the rules and got all of the genin to their seats. A mere minute into the exam, however. I'm done. Naruto cried at the top of his lungs, flipping his test sheet over. Then he turned to take Hinata's hands in his, and, looking into her eyes, asked, Hinata darling, are you done as well? Why? Yes, she squeaked, turning bright red. Then turn your paper over, he softly suggested, gently reaching out and taking her into a hug. We have 40 minutes left until the 10th question. The amazingly fast motion as she flipped her paper face down was not lost on anyone, nor was her blush or the smile steadily creeping up on her face as she melted into his hug. Oh, Hinata-chan, you are so lovely. I must kiss you. And then Naruto did so, with the benefit of plenty of makeout sessions behind him. Several of the other genin nearby started to whoop and make cat calls. Nah, Naruto. Hinata cried out as he nibbled a particularly sensitive spot at the base her neck, clinging to him for all her might. Naruto ooh, Sakura screamed, rising from her desk at this unseemly public display of affection. Then out of the corner of her eyes she caught one of the test proctors making a careful note on his clipboard, and sank meekly back down in her chair again, ashamed as her memory prompted her about the bet. But why was Naruto baiting her, and, when did he learn how to kiss? Ibiki, standing in front of the two embracing students and pretending indifference to them, picked up their test papers and quirked an eyebrow at them. Interesting. Those were not the same answers his plants would provide, but they were detailed, complete, and correct for all he could tell, and though the papers were identical to each other, no one had caught them, not when they copied each other's answers, nor when they'd somehow rigged it to have adjacent seats. Interesting. These two would bear watching. Hinata shrieked out, lost to the world around her. Ibiki looked around the class. Well, no one was obviously treating this as a coded message, from what he could tell. And though it wouldn't be too hard to encode moans and gasps like that, unless they could actually catch them transmitting data, they couldn't count it as having caught an attempt to cheat, not so long as the couple acted out their roles so well. An ingenious strategy actually, and a command performance carrying it out. That took talent. He almost believed they were doing it just for the fun they were having. So even though he knew this could be no more innocent than the dog barking, he couldn't do anything unless they messed up and got caught. No, these two would bear watching indeed. It's not fair. Sakura complained, looking askance at Naruto. You even have a better figure than I do. What do you expect? It's a variant of the transformation technique. I can look however I want, Naruto-chan told her, presently in his technique disguise of a buxom blonde girl, and wearing a lacy teddy with silk stockings. And Ino has excellent taste. What I want to know is how you held your nerve for the entire test. It wasn't easy, the pink-haired one complained at low volume, looking away from her teammate. Hinata sighed fondly, sitting on the floor with her arms wrapped around Naruto-chan's legs, and head laying in her lap, where Naruto was pleasantly stroking her hair. You aren't going to stay inside all day, are you? Ino teased. Why, yes, as a matter of fact, I am. Do you know how many perverts there are out there? Naruto-chan teased right back at her. Yeah, loads. Ino shrugged. 387, Naruto corrected. And one closet pervert. Hinata sighed softly yet loudly, warm in her contentment. Sakura's eyebrow twitched. Make that 88, she grumbled. True to form, Ebisu worked with him until Naruto could perform the body switch technique quickly and effortlessly, needing very little warning before activating it. Actually, the skill gave a great tactical advantage to Naruto. As he grew good enough at it, his shadow clones could now use the technique without a serious drain on their chakra stores, which meant they could use it to escape from blows that might otherwise destroy them, multiplying their effectiveness and survivability drastically. They still couldn't take a hit, but they could evade one far more easily. That made them more than a human blitz attack, as they could still charge in a wave, but no longer did they need to be replaced for each attack, as some would almost certainly survive to continue the assault. Also, the real Naruto could be far more easily and completely protected by his clones, setting aside a bodyguard group who, instead of leaping in front of blows to shield him, something that didn't often work, especially when a foe used attacks that could go right through several bodies in a row, they could hang back, and use body switch to replace him at crucial moments, getting him out of combat before the nasty attacks hit. Naruto almost immediately hit on a battle strategy where his clones would leap at a foe, as usual, then body switch out so their target would be struck by a hail of logs and small boulders before the clones once again rushed in to attack the hopefully bruised opponent during the distraction. So, once again he had multiplied the value of his mass clone attacks by fully mastering one of the basic three under Ebisu. And, once again, it failed to make any difference when facing Orochimaru. Although, it did take the Sannin slightly longer to kill him this time, so that was sort of a success. So, the transformation technique, huh? Naruto asked Ebisu the next time they met. The special Jonin was impressed. How did you guess? Oh, just a feeling, Naruto groaned, depressed. HMPH. Perform the technique. I want to see where you are so I know what you are missing. Forming the seal, the blonde boy transformed into a copy of Iruka in a puff of smoke. Ebisu examined the disguise for a moment, then he stepped back and straightened his glasses. Not bad. Far from useless, actually. You still rely too much on a stance and concentration. We shall have to train that out of you so you can do it on the move. Your puff of smoke is far too obvious. We must reduce it. Ideally you must eliminate that entirely, and you'll want to be able to perform the technique on short notice even when surprised. Still, for all your clumsy execution of it, the results are nearly flawless. I am having trouble finding any of the usual telltales or signs that this is an illusion. What are you talking about? The Naruto Iruka asked, confused. All illusion techniques are vulnerable, Ebisu instructed. They have weak points, and are limited by the imaginations and power of those who create them, in addition to being limited by skill. So, details will be incorrect, edges may blur, and the interaction with the environment will all be flawed. But in your case, well, look at your feet as an example. An excellent job. I am honestly surprised. Naruto Iruka lifted both of his feet, one at a time, to look at them, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. What are you talking about? The special Jonin folded his arms and huffed. Naruto, don't treat me as a fool. You are not Iruka. You are smaller than him, for one. My first impulse would be to scold you for choosing a shape too far different from your own to hide in, but I won't, as you execute it flawlessly. Huh. Naruto was shaking his head in confusion. Ebisu sighed, shoving his glasses back up his nose. Naruto, you cannot be ignorant of this. I know there is a story going around the younger students of someone who transformed into a shuriken and was thrown by another member of his team to surprise an enemy, but such tall tales are ridiculous. The technique does not work that way. All that transformation does, all it ever can do, is to cloak you in an illusion. It has not ever been a real change, wild rumors to the contrary, nor can it ever be one. For a boy who seeks so much approval, I am surprised you reject my compliments on your technique. The special Jonin waved to him as he listed off points. In the first place, your feet are smaller than Iruka's. Being a simple illusion, the grass you stand on should poke through the image where your feet aren't but his would be. Yet you have already accounted for that and covered it, enhancing your illusion so that it seems as if the grass bends under the full impression of the foot. Nor are you blurred or incomplete. It is quite frankly one of the better images I have ever seen worn, Jonin level easily. I was unaware you were trying to become a stealth and infiltration specialist. But you must be, to have worked so hard on this technique. It must have taken you months to get the Iruka disguise this perfect. Tell me, have you practiced any others? Shocked, momentarily speechless, Naruto formed the set of seals again, and in a poof of smoke was replaced by the image of the third Hokage. Most impressive. Ebisu walked around him, rubbing his chin thoughtfully as he judged the image. I could almost believe it was him. Then Naruto Hokage reached out and pinched his nose. Gwahh. The special Jonin leapt back several feet, limbs splayed in surprise, before he recomposed himself and straightened his glasses. I must give you credit, Naruto. Precisely matching the movements of your illusion to yourself, particularly when it is of a shape taller and with longer reach than you, that is a skill that will serve you well at infiltration. I did not expect it from you. That is a very advanced technique. Naruto Hokage grinned from ear to ear. I'm not an illusion. Wah. The special Jonin's glasses fell down his face as his jaw dropped in shock. Then he was all over Naruto, patting him on his head, shoulders, testing that his arms were real and solid, then frisking him all over. Forgive me, Hokage-sama. The special Jonin bowed. But, what has become of my student? With a puff of smoke, the technique got released and Naruto stood there. I'm still here. Once again the special Jonin had to pat him all over before he could believe it was really him. Then, composure lost entirely, he stuttered, you mean, but. When I change, I really change, the boy confirmed. Instantly the special Jonin was standing by his side, hand over his mouth and eyes alert for witnesses able to overhear this conversation. When he found none, he whispered into Naruto's ear. You must never tell anyone of this, Naruto. As of this moment, you must consider your transformation an S-rank technique. It is capable of foiling the security of practically any ninja village. We cannot allow this to fall into enemy hands. Have you taught anyone else your version of the technique, as you use it? Yeah, Konohamaru, your other student. I taught him as part of technique. The boy blinked. Ebisu was standing across from him and bowed. Naruto, I must apologize. You are indeed a genius of the highest caliber. I thank you for your gift to my other student. Now, I must go report to the Hokage this information. Wait, Naruto called out, stopping him. Can't you give me a few hints on how to refine my smoke and stuff, first? Of course, Naruto. The special Jonin fixed his glasses. I can spare you the time for that. An hour later, after Ebisu had left to report this information, a giggling Naruto discovered that the scroll of forbidden seals was under more guards and security than the last time, including a seal array that the Hokage knew how to deactivate, but Naruto didn't. So much for the short route to power. Probably the best thing Iruka had ever done for him, Naruto reflected, was teach him how to read. If only it hadn't taken a time loop for him to do it properly. All of those other things people took for granted, the village pariah had to struggle for. No one had ever taught him things others took for granted. Not having parents, or any reliable adult figures, really, he could not get the most basic assistance on most matters. So, for most of his life, he'd gone without crucial knowledge, and a big part of that was having a literacy level on par with most preschoolers. Most of the time he'd spent studying the scroll of forbidden seals was trying to get what the various kanji meant, and most of the work he'd done on the skill was in studying the pictures, then trying out variations on themes to guess the correct combination to activate the technique. And he'd beaten himself up pretty badly during the process. It was the same way with his other techniques, only in one case that seemed to have done him a good turn, at least with regards to the transformation technique. The version he'd cobbled together on his own did what he thought the technique should have done, rather than what everyone else did. But still, overall, the inability to read well had been a major hindrance to him, all his life long. His schoolwork had stunk, but most of the reason behind his low grades came from his inability to read textbooks, and the few kanji he knew were mostly learned by watching and listening to what the teacher wrote on the board during classes, the reason he'd attended at all, when mostly he'd rather be skipping out on boring lectures to do stuff that was interesting. Now, however, well, that was one of the first things corrected by his time studying with Iruka during this endlessly repeating loop. But it had taken so long to do properly it was only now beginning to bear fruit. And it made such a difference in his life. It was like his functional illiteracy had been a huge chain holding him back. Without that impediment, it was revealed that he easily had one of the finest minds in the village. Sakura. Bah, she had nothing on him. The highest grades in their year, and yet she didn't have half of his brilliance, now that it was allowed to shine. Whatever wall the villagers had wanted to erect around him to keep him from growing was now broken. Because he could read, really read, not puzzle out a few kanji here or there and puzzle out some of the rest by context, he could look up information by himself, no longer depending on whatever scraps they wanted to dole out, which was always the least they could get away with. Freed of his ignorance, Naruto's mind was now shooting forward in making up for lost time. First recovering to where it ought to have been for his age level, and then rapidly shooting higher. While teaching him the answers to the Chunin exam, Iruka had brought his literacy level up to where it should be for his age, now Naruto kept pressing it higher. All of his life he'd been limited to knowing only what others had been willing to teach him, which meant that he knew nothing. Or at least nothing they could get away with, forgetting, to share with him. The ability to read changed that whole paradigm. Now he could find out things for himself, all he had to do was find it in a book. And books didn't hate him or want to keep him ignorant. They were willing to share with anyone who opened their covers. It didn't matter to them he was a demon container, shunned and avoided by everyone, the most unpopular boy in the village. Books quickly became some of his best friends. Why? Because he could learn stuff from books. There was all sorts of things hidden out in there, like the names of Orochimaru's apprentices, and the history of Konoha, all of the stuff he'd missed out learning during class, as well as stuff the average villagers didn't know. Whatever he wanted to know, it seemed there was an answer in books. Case in point, Naruto giggled to himself, was the dating and courtship book he was now holding. In it were all kinds of suggestions and rules no one had ever thought to tell him about. It was amazing, really. It filled in the gaps between what the giggling kunoichi could tell him about, and what Kurenai expected him to be able to understand. Naruto had already made some progress on that whole romance thing, enough so that by now when he was thinking about it, he was, for a 12-year-old boy, fairly smooth. Of course, that wasn't saying much, as boys his age were still all remarkably crude, but he was getting to where he was no longer an abomination offensive to the female. Of all of the ways the villagers' hatred had stunted him, his social ignorance was the worst. He'd literally had no idea how normal people interacted. The villagers had made sure of that. But, now that the dam of his ignorance had burst with him learning how to really read, he was able to correct that. The library was full of novels of how normal people treated each other. It was fascinating to the boy, like a light shining forth in a room deliberately held dark all this time. It was liberating in a way he could not even describe. Once he'd crested the limit of functional literacy, he'd immediately gone and hidden out in the public library for a couple of months, reading as a man who was parched and thirsty might drink, not even caring about the Chunin test. It changed his life. And, not surprisingly, his angry teammates never found him there. But having been empty-headed, now he wanted to be filled. And all of the roadblocks he'd been up against seemed to have their answers now. His dates with Hinata had kind of gotten stuck in a rut, and so he decided to try something new concerning them, giving up on restaurants entirely to throw her a party at his house. It was a disaster of the worst sort. Naruto's home was hardly tidy at the best of times, barely clean, and only somewhat livable. It was obvious on taking her there that Hinata found the place horrible, although to tell by her reaction, it was not the first time she'd seen it, which was odd, as it was certainly the first time he'd invited her. But you know what? Now he could learn from that. Having read a detective novel or two, he understood about looking for clues. Her having seen his apartment before meant something. So he'd asked her about that after the next switch, and she'd stuttered out an apology like she'd been caught in some horrible atrocity. Her crime: she'd liked him since they'd been small, and had watched him from a distance, always there, but never brave enough to step in and help. And yet, confronted about it, she treated it as though she'd been doing some horrible thing. Naruto had to laugh. Here, the mystery person who'd given him presents for his birthday, left on his doorstep year after year, probably the one person in town who'd liked him growing up, was afraid that she'd done something awful by liking him. It was too much. He had to laugh. Now in the past he would have done that by falling on the ground and rolling around, and she would have run off crying, utterly crushed by his response. But now that he had a few romance novels under his belt, so to speak, he knew enough to hug her and chuckle into her hair in between whispers that it was all right, explaining to her as he had breath exactly what he'd been thinking, that she'd been the nicest person in the whole world to him, and expecting him to be angry for that was silly. The way he explained it even made her chuckle a bit along with him, mostly that was in relief that he didn't hate her, however. No, things had definitely turned a corner in his life now. It was never going to be the same again. And he started out by asking Hinata about her life. Lionheart. Pissed. Hinata-chan, are you awake? Eep. The lavender-haired girl came awake in fright, only to see Naruto there with the goggles she'd once given him on his head where his headband used to be. His ninja marker now hung around his neck, like hers did. Before she could conclude anything, he was leaning closer. I'll leave so you can get dressed. I'd just hoped we could walk to the exam together. After all, I just discovered the cutest girl in our class was also the one who has been giving me presents all these years. Thank you, Hinata-chan. He bent close to place a kiss on her unresisting forehead. You believed in me. That, more than anything, is what kept me going. Then he was gone. She hurried to wash herself and scramble into her clothes. Naruto was waiting for her by the gate. So high she was that her long-time crush had finally discovered, and liked her, that her feet barely hit the ground as they chatted along on their way to the center. She was walking on clouds the entire time. It never occurred to her to wonder how he knew the guard's schedule and sentry posts around the Hyuga complex well enough to sneak into her room, or that they couldn't have their bloodline active all of the time due to chakra constraints. For Naruto, it was the least he could do after finding out about her unhappy home life. Really, he'd always thought having no parents was bad, but having her dad was possibly worse. The guy was an active negative. He'd been upset before the time loop when Neji told him about the caged bird seal, but between that, plus what he'd been worming out of Kurenai and the Hokage, plus what he could get by prompting Hinata, sometimes confronting Neji, also, he was beginning to get an extremely poor opinion of the clan, or at least of the clan head. It had taken weeks of learning her responses, learning how to befriend her quickly and get her to trust him, but in a conversation about how to help Hinata, Kurenai, whom he'd gotten half drunk, had told him of that time she'd picked up the shy girl to take her to the academy for her first class, how she'd warned the father that being a genin was a dangerous path for Hinata. Naruto still felt chilled over her quote of the man's response, that it didn't matter, as Hinata was a failure and the Hyuga clan had no use for her. Then the coldness of Hiashi declaring, if she dies, she dies. Worst of all, he'd said that in front of her with Hinata right there listening. No, in Naruto's mind, the Hyuga clan was a problem that had to be fixed. And the biggest part of that to him was making sure Hinata could be happy. Fortunately, at least that part was easy. He loved that girl, and only part of that was she was the person who'd taught him what love was. Say Kabuto. What have you got on Neji Hyuga? The silver-haired ninja selected a card from deep within. It says here he was last year's top rookie. Unarmed fighting specialist, practicing his family's gentle fist style. His bloodline also makes him a prime contender in the exams. Nothing on the caged bird seal. Naruto though despondently, and nearly turned away before pausing. What's the top card in your deck say? Oh, it's a chart showing the population of the 5 great ninja villages and how they compare to each other. See. Say Kabuto. What's the second card down in your deck say? Oh, that lists off the leaders of the various elemental countries. Here, let me show you. Say Kabuto. What's the third card in your deck say? Oh, well here, let's see. That's my listing of the various villages that have hosted the Chunin exam, in order, ever since I started taking it. Only a memento, really. They never ask. Say Kabuto. What's the 82nd card down in your deck say? Oh, just picking numbers are you? Well, let's see anyway. That's a nin info card on a girl who died during our last exam. I guess I should throw that one away. What did she die of? Oh, a rain ninja killed her using a rain of needles. It was ugly, but not too unexpected. She just wasn't up to taking the Chunin test, to be honest. Say Kabuto. What's the 292nd card down in your deck say? Oh, wow, I never expected to be asked anything like that. Just picking numbers out of the air, are you? Well, let's have a look. It's the bottom one, and it looks like an information chart on Hayate Gecko, a special jonin of Konoha and frequently an instructor of the Chunin exams when they are held locally. It says here that he is in chronically poor health, which is particularly sad since his specialty is swordsmanship, although he is also a master of the shadow clone technique. Thanks, Naruto waved, then paused, turning back to face the silver-haired genin. How do you make those cards, anyway? Kabuto smiled, straightening his glasses. Oh, it's pretty simple. Here, let me show you how to make your own. Do you have a piece of paper handy? Naruto smiled. I'll bring one tomorrow. Well, no need to waste time. I think I have a spare on me. Kabuto started rummaging around in his pouch, but came up nothing. Well, I guess not. Sorry, I guess we'll do it tomorrow. It's not like I have a card I can just erase to show you. Naruto, still smiling, suggested, try cards 82, 103, and 212. Oh, hi Sakura. The blonde, orange-clad genin called out as he blurred past. Pink hair swishing in the breeze of his passage, the girl paused to wonder at Naruto's behavior before continuing on her walk towards the test center. Why hadn't Naruto bugged her? Oi, Nara, she heard him call out in the distance. You up to a shogi game after the test, if the examiners don't need us? So troublesome. You wouldn't be any challenge. Win or lose, I'll take Ino off your hands for a day. Deal. Stupid. Why would I agree to such a thing? Ino objected, fists clenched. Because I'll carry your things while you shop, and help you out in your store for the rest of the day, the other yellow-haired genin told her. Ino blinked once, twice, then smiled. Sure. Thanks Naruto. Behind them, The pink-haired girl stood, blinking over this exchange. I. Naruto whistled as he skipped along. He was now varying his daily schedule as much as possible. Some days he picked up Hinata at her home and spent the day with her, and those were always nice. He and Hinata had really started to become close friends as he learned more about her, and he'd really started to like her. It was hard not to like her when she already liked him so much. From her perspective, from what she told him, his just suddenly revealing that he liked her too was a gift from heaven. So he could reveal all sorts of knowledge about her likes and dislikes, and she would just assume that he'd somehow miraculously been observing her while she'd stalked him. In short, she'd gladly accept whatever level of friendship he offered her. Naruto had, very quickly, grown to like and appreciate her. Nobody else in all of those repeats had been changing how they acted towards him, except her, so she stood out in that whatever attention he gave her would change her reactions toward him. It had quickly become a lifeline to the endlessly repeating boy. However, he was careful not to rely on it too much, lest the two became boring. And he didn't think he could bear to have his one, true friend start to bore him. He'd rather die. Well, he had died, fairly often actually, and it hadn't stuck, but it was the sentiment that counted. So he reserved those Hinata days for when he really needed them, once a week or so at most, and even so he'd begun to take her out on picnics and so on, varying their dates as much as possible to keep things fresh. Other days, well, some days he researched, both the Hyuga clan and other topics. The conversations to impress his friends had lost most of their initial luster. By this point, when he started to reveal hidden knowledge, they tested and tested him to find its limits, until that took all day without him learning about any new subjects he hadn't covered. He'd found he could change that when he had a new topic of his own to introduce, but those were hard to think of, as left to their own devices they'd all ask the same questions over again, leading to the same subjects he'd studied before. So he'd taken to breaking into the academy and reading the school books over, including some texts he had never owned any copies of, and some of which had been sold to him as special copies, with information deleted or changed, to teach him wrong answers just to have fresh material to inject into those conversations, as otherwise they grew too boring. But he had also started to vary whom he'd hang out with on most days. Nara was a bright spot on the otherwise dull backdrop of repetition, in that after the lazy boy had taught him shogi they'd been able to play together, and their games had always been different. Of course, Naruto always lost, but that wasn't the point. Ino was another refreshing person to be around. As he'd begun to expand his circle of friends, Naruto had discovered the girl to be nothing like Sakura was, and yet everything he'd hoped she would be. To put that another way, all of the qualities he'd previously admired about his pink-haired former crush had been taught to her by Ino, who also had none of Sakura's flaws. Well, none except a crush on the Uchiha anyway, but their Ino was capable of listening to reason. Sakura never was, in all of the times he'd tried her. The textbook definition of a chauvinist was a blindly devoted patriot, and by that Sakura was definitely a Sasuke chauvinist. Nothing he did was wrong in her eyes, nor could he do anything wrong as far as she was concerned. Naruto had long since grown tired of it. But luckily, he didn't have to put up with it, as there was nothing that required him to hang around with his team outside of missions. So long as he showed up for tests, they had nothing to complain about. At least until Orochimaru killed them again. And by spending less time with his team, Naruto got to hang out with more interesting people. Ino was one such. By just suggesting one thing or another he could get her to shop for it, and so long as he stayed in disguise, for reasons he found easy to explain to her, they'd go around town shopping for whatever. Doing such, he was learning how to tell good deals from bad, judge prices and product quality, as well as where to get deals, all stuff he'd never known before, as he'd been lucky to get inside a store's door growing up. Those times they shopped for food, she'd also help show him how to cook, which was yet another of those skills he'd never had anyone to teach him as he'd been growing up. His ramen obsession was a function of three things: his desperation to eat something, his inability to shop normally, people sold him old, out of date or rancid food as often as possible, and all for premium prices, which was a real problem back before he could read and couldn't tell they were cheating him, and not knowing how to cook on his own, forcing him to choose the simplest of all food to prepare, even though it had all of the nutritional value of warm cardboard. It was probably only his healing ability that kept him alive. Well, that and the people at Ichiraku, who were nice to him. No, Naruto was swiftly becoming very fond of Ino, and after shopping, and sometimes a meal, she'd let him help out in her family's flower shop, usually in his Naruto-chan disguise, to avoid scaring off any customers, where he learned about the various flowers, their meanings and properties. So that was good. By now Naruto had exhausted the limits of what Iruka could teach on most school subjects. The man was only a Chunin, and a schoolteacher at that, so while he had a broad grasp of the essential ninja basics on up to Chunin level, his focus had been down, on teaching Genin, not up, on learning Jonin level techniques or knowledge. But still, while Naruto might not be Chunin level on most skills, it was nice for him to have the book smarts of his hoped for ninja rank, and to be able to calculate a parabola when he needed to. So he went on reading books on those subjects for answers to give Hinata, because asking Iruka grew to be too much of a pain, as his former teacher took longer to find things than just looking up the answers himself. Next day he was planning on losing a bet with Kiba and paying a forfeit of having to help out around that family's kennel, where he learned almost as many things as at Ino's shop. They just weren't as nice about it, and taught about dogs instead of flowers. After that, well, maybe he'd hang out with the Hokage for a day and prompt the old man to tell him stories. That had started out as a way to learn about his former favorite student, Orochimaru, but it turned out the old guy had a storytelling bone or two in his body, and he'd lived so long and seen so much stuff, all he'd have to do is prompt him the right way, and the Hokage never seemed to run out of material, really interesting stuff, too. Yeah, it was worth it. He'd go hang out with the Hokage again after this. After who knows how long training with Ebisu. Months of hard work on basic chakra control to be decent, then weeks each spent mastering intricacies of the body switch, basic clone, and transformation techniques, then more months spent on further chakra control exercises until he was tolerable, above average, but barely. The special Jonin had taken him back to the basic essential 3 ninja techniques again until he could perform them without seals, on almost no notice and with hardly any sign he was doing them. It was hardly possible to master them any further. There was only so much you could do to refine something, and he'd about hit that limit. Yes, Ebisu liked to focus on the basics. He considered them important, vital even, or it could just be that he disliked Naruto that much. Once more the blonde genin showed up for his instruction, almost physically able to feel his expectation of the guy wanting to spend more time refining basic techniques, or to show him yet more minor refinements to establish slightly greater chakra control, on the road up to acceptable, almost good. He nearly fell down in a faint when his teacher declared it was time the boy ought to learn a jutsu that wasn't among the basic 3. Finally, at last, he got to learn body flicker, the short-range transportation technique. Okay, it wasn't much, being both low rank and common, almost a calling card for being a true ninja. But hey, he was excited. Kakashi may have 1,000 ninja techniques, but Naruto only had 4 that he hadn't invented himself. One more made a big difference. Sasuke, you do sense something odd about Naruto. Having failed to get a useful response from her crush as he passed by where she sat eating, Sakura went back to her lunch, gazing off at her other teammate, who was laughing and joking with a trio of normally reserved genin from Hidden Sound. The next day it would be Hidden Rain, but she didn't know that. Quote. Naruto. A voice asked from the door to his apartment. The boy looked up from what he was doing. Oi, Sakura. I wasn't expecting you. He looked oddly puzzled by that statement, but he hid it well, so she didn't notice. Her mind was preoccupied anyway, but not so much she didn't notice the parts strewn on the floor around him. What are you doing? Oh, the boy gestured casually to the open book on the floor beside him. Learning how to fix things. The lock on my door has been busted for a long time. I thought I'd learn how to repair it. That's nice, the kunoichi mumbled, not really meaning it. So what brings you here? He prompted. Earlier today, I saw you talking with some sound ninja, she stated. I don't think that's right. They could just be using you. They might do anything to get ahead in the exam. What are you doing? Oh, the boy gestured casually to the open book on the counter beside him. Learning how to fix things. The hot water tap in my sink has been busted for a long time. I thought I'd learn how to repair it. That's nice, the kunoichi mumbled, not really meaning it. So what brings you here? He prompted. Earlier today, I saw you talking with some grass ninja, she stated. I don't think that's right. They could just be using you. They might do anything to get ahead in the exam. What are you doing? Oh, the boy gestured casually to the bucket of plaster on the floor beside him with the spreading tool in his hand. Just repairing some of the holes in my walls. It makes it less drafty in here. That's nice, the kunoichi mumbled, not really meaning it. So what brings you here? He prompted. Earlier today, I saw you talking with some sand ninja, she stated. Oh yeah, he brightened. Gaara is the youngest son of the Cage, and the other two members of his team are his brother and sister, Konkuro and Tamari. Nice folks. Why did you approach them? She demanded, fists clenched in worry. That one with the jug almost killed you. Oh, I just wanted to know why they are going to attack our village, that's all. And being hostile or wanting me dead doesn't make them any different than most of Konoha. Sakura found herself gaping like a fish. Oh, hi Sakura-chan. Naruto called out through the mouthful of nails held between his teeth. What are you doing? She approached, momentarily forgetting why she was there. Oh, I'm just opening up the wall of this room. The apartment next to mine has always been empty, and I got the Hokage's permission to join it to mine so I can have plenty of space for guests to visit. I've got it almost done now. What do you want? Naruto, I just wanted you to know that I saw you flirting with Kiba's sister. That's nice. Could you hand me that wrench please? Baffled at this response, Sakura did so. Why did you do it? Because it was fun. Why do other people flirt? Sakura had no answer to that. Instead she looked around her. Why are we in the basement of your apartment building? Naruto confidently spun the wrench around his fingers before making the last adjustments to the pipes. Because this is where the hot water to my apartment got turned off. I'm just turning it back on again. Oh, I had to replace some rusted through and busted up pipes first, though. Someone must have taken an axe to them to make certain I had cold baths. But I was able to salvage spares from a building that's scheduled for demolition. Oh, Naruto, I had no idea your apartment was this good. Sakura looked about herself in amazement while handing him the screwdriver he'd asked for. Yeah, it does look like kind of a dump from the outside, doesn't it? He said through a couple of screws held between his teeth, lying on his back on two boards between two ladders as he did something to his ceiling. What are you doing up there, anyway? Oh, I'm just finished rewiring the place and I thought this would be a good spot to hang a ceiling fan from. What do you think? She thought about it for a second. Wouldn't it be better over there? I was going to put a sofa there, with a coffee table in front and recliners to either side. The table is going to go here. I thought about carpeting, but I think I prefer hardwood floors with some throw rugs on high traffic areas. Yes. Sakura chirped brightly. I think that would look nice. I'm just saying you should have shown up to the test wearing more than your underwear and a cape, that's all. Sakura insisted. He mumbled, busy fastening upholstery onto a newly assembled recliner frame. Naruto, could you turn that thing off? I've got to talk to you. What is it, Sakura? The boy lifted up his goggles after turning off the power saw on the workbench. She saw it. What are you doing? Making myself a matching dining room set to go with the remodeled kitchen. Don't touch the table, It hasn't had a chance for the varnish to dry yet, and I don't want to have to buff out any fingerprints to get a good, high gloss. Oh. She blinked several times in confusion. What did you want to talk about? He asked, going over to check on the clamps that were currently pressing wood for the curved back chairs. Oi, Sakura. Something you want to talk about? Yeah, I guess. The kunoichi nervously entered the room where he was working. Just a moment, he cautioned, blowing through the hollow wooden rod to expand the ball of glass on the end into a mold. Okay, you can talk now. What are you doing? Making a set of goblets and glasses to go with my new tableware. Why? Immediately on waking up one morning, Naruto created 60 shadow clones that immediately set about performing tasks, transforming his house in ways that he himself had practiced up before. 2 more ran off to make purchases around town, including a better set of clothes, a blue outfit based on Kurenai's suggestions. He'd be broke after doing it, but that would reset tomorrow with the rest of it. That afternoon, when he led Hinata to his house for their lunch date, she stood staring, then turned to him with stars in her eyes. I learned how to fix it up since your last visit, he told her, looking the girl fondly in her eyes while gently stroking her chin. Naruto-kun. She leapt into his arms and squeezed him tightly as the romantic atmosphere overwhelmed her. Sighing as it heard this from the next room, the apron-wearing clone in the kitchen turned down the heat on the roast. It looked like dinner would have to be delayed. Sighing fondly as she got told about it later, Kurenai told him, about the only thing you missed was romantic music. Good job, Uzumaki. Music? The boy asked her intently. Nothing must be neglected or forgotten in providing the perfect date to the one girl who'd always believed in him. The next morning had Naruto in his disguise, although fully clothed, looking in a music shop window. Both instruments and lessons were each more than he could afford. So, the next question became, how to get more money. Lionheart. Getting music lessons was easier than Naruto thought. He'd show up disguised as the Uchiha, and they'd fall all over themselves to show him around, let him test various instruments, and even give him a complimentary lesson or two, usually lasting for a couple of hours of decent quality instruction. It was sickening, absolutely revolting, favoritism of the worst sort, and still for all of that a very useful loophole for the poor boy to exploit. And he did not need more than a free lesson or two, given that he was in an endless loop of recycling days, one free lesson became an infinite number of them. The music teachers didn't even question as his skill began to rise, assuming it was the rightful privilege of the last Uchiha to know everything. Well, that was a useful weakness he could exploit in other ways, too. Naruto would be the first to admit that he had no martial arts at all. He had no style, no finesse, and absolutely no understanding beyond the 2-year-old, charge the guy and hit him, mindset. Heck, in one of the recent visits to the Inuzuka family clinic, helping out after having lost a bet, he'd gotten into an argument with Kiba about being weak, where the dog user had frankly told him that it didn't matter that Naruto knew the shadow clone, because 1,000 times nothing is still nothing. And, well, in all honesty, the blonde couldn't deny the truth of his friend's statement. What could you expect after years of teachers who would always arrange to send him to the principal, out on bucket duty, scrubbing erasers or otherwise getting him out of the way while the rest of the class practiced their martial arts and weapon techniques? Iruka had put a stop to that, but by then the damage had already been done, and Naruto, having none of the basics, had tried to compensate by sheer enthusiasm and bloody-minded determination, as he had in so many other areas of his life. Well, now Naruto knew better than anyone that guts and determination didn't make up for having no real skill. And really, he'd already sent thousands of untrained clones up against trained fighters only to have them evaporate like soap bubbles before the skilled guy. No, all he could really do was waste a skilled fighter's time. Even with all of his basic ninja techniques fully mastered, thanks to Ebisu, all he could really do was waste more of the guy's time. He wasn't presenting any danger to the enemy ninja he fought, even when he fought for real. It was depressing, but another thing Naruto had learned was that you could not correct a situation until you accepted what it really was, no matter how much you might not want to face it. And being nothing more than a punching bag on a battlefield was something he felt had to be corrected, and soon. Taking a hit wasn't so serious a weakness for most people using the shadow clone, because taking a hit in combat was usually a very bad thing. Getting a kunai stuck in your chest was a big deal, whether or not you were a clone. So most fighters could go a long time before taking a hit at all. They'd learn to avoid it. It was an integral part of knowing how to fight well. But Naruto didn't know how to fight at all, not with any style, anyway. He'd always plowed forward, shrugging off hits and damage to go smack his enemy. No wonder his clones didn't last long. So he began a plan of attending sets of drills where he practiced with some academy students while under a transformation disguise as they got taught basic combat techniques at classes Naruto had somehow never been invited to. All he had to know was who was out sick that day and hadn't bothered to tell anyone, even if he had to arrange the sick day by tying up the students in question himself. First off, he did this with the poorest students in the lowest grades, that way his own ignorance did not stand out at all. Then, as he gained some degree of competence, he replaced better and older pupils. After he'd done that enough to have a decent grasp of the basics, he would use disguises to impersonate top students and approach teachers for special one-on-one training. It embarrassed him that one of those top students was Konohamaru. But the kid had been having personal instruction under Ebisu for years. Actually, on that note, he deliberately sought out Ebisu disguised as Konohamaru a few times to help get a handle on the basics, because if there was one thing he had learned, it was that Ebisu taught basics relentlessly and well. Although he got a little ashamed at how surprised and pleased the special Jonin got that his prize pupil Konohamaru was listening intently for once. That embarrassment behind him, he sought out Iruka as himself for similar treatment. It shocked the Chunin how much his former pupil had improved, so Naruto told him he'd been seeking private lessons, which, in a way, was true. But even so, there was only so much those two would teach him while still believing he was the person he was passing himself off as, even himself. Still, even after months wherein he'd exhausted all of what the Ninja Academy could do to teach about armed and unarmed fighting, that still only brought him up to where a genin should be. Hey, it was miles above where he'd been before, and it was a top-notch rookie genin he'd ended up impersonating at the end, the best in the academy, so that's where his skill level topped out, as that was where he'd exhausted this opportunity for instruction. But that skill level still wasn't going to make much of a difference against the sort of things he'd been having to fight against. In fact, just to see, he tried his new skills out on Orochimaru, and the snake Sannin didn't even notice the change. Even the charge of 1,000 skilled genin did not faze him any more than the previous charges of 1,000 unskilled berserkers. Either way, he'd cut them down like grass. But that wasn't the point. No, the point of this whole exercise was still on exploiting what the generous townspeople would give to the Uchiha, usually without question, and glad for the opportunity to do so. And, well, no one who was capable of teaching fighting arts would believe that Sasuke wasn't already a skilled genin. So, now having the fighting skills a proper genin should, and that Sasuke had been using months ago, Naruto was in a position to approach instructors and ask for training. It was sickening how easily he got it, too. However, just as he was on the cusp of great success, he hit a wall and his hopes came crashing down on him. Because the really good instructors noticed something that the ones at the academy never did, Naruto had never internalized those lessons in the way a good fighter had to. Fighting was a very physical art. In order to be good at it, the body itself had to know what it was doing. But due to the endless repeats, nothing physical stayed with him. He couldn't condition his body, nor could he train reflexes. And that was a problem, because the body needed to know what it was going to do. Naruto had trained his mind until it knew it very well, but that wasn't good enough. At that level, he was still thinking about what he had to do to get it right. No, to be good at a physical skill like martial arts required the body itself to have conditioned reflexes so the mind didn't have to think about every step and motion along the way. You'd never get any real speed or free up the mind to think tactically until the complex motions of the actual forms, the stances, punches, blocks and so on, were automatic. The really good instructors wouldn't touch him until he had that, no matter whose face and form he wore, or how perfect the disguise was. They could tell the moment they started teaching him that he was missing that basic and essential element. And even the good ones who stuck with him after that discovery would think only of how to teach it to him. That meant practice, 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 endlessly repeating the proper forms. Only, in Naruto's case, after a reset his muscles wouldn't recall a bit of it. He wasn't sore or tired, but his muscles wouldn't retain the benefit either. And sadly, without that, he was as good as he was going to get, at least as far as the fighting arts were concerned. He wasn't even half as good as he could have been at the same level of knowledge, if only he'd been able to practice in ways that could effectively train his body. In fact, one of those teachers told him straight out that he'd be twice as good as he was now, using only what he already knew, if only his body knew it all as well as his mind did. The teacher had been trying to encourage him, as twice as good as the top academy student whom he'd been impersonating to get his instruction of late, was almost as good as a rookie Chunin ought to be, which would put him in the ballpark of where he wanted to be, because he was still taking that test. But instead of encourage him, it ended up having the opposite effect. Naruto had been basing so many hopes on his infinite ability to achieve, using repeats to improve and get better, overcoming all of his former problems and become a better ninja, that to run into a barrier he couldn't cross, on something so basic and fundamental to all of his goals, was difficult not to be shattered by. It was made especially bad by the fact that he'd always fancied himself a close combat ninja, one who'd go right in there and mix it up with an enemy, and his main strategy and primary technique all reflected this. Then to be faced with this, having hit an uncrossable ceiling on his martial arts talents just when he was beginning to feel he could be good at it, and the sure knowledge that if he wanted to improve further he'd have to abandon further progress on that one path and reinvent himself as a ninja. It was a crushing blow to his self-esteem, and merited a Hinata day or two back-to-back just to recover from the hurt of it. Even so, he'd had to cry a bit before he could get over it and accept his new handicap. By the time he'd hit the same limit on his musical studies he was almost resigned to it, having somewhat expected it. But it still hurt, so he still took a week off of any serious training to have a prank vacation to make up for it. Luckily, he could still learn chakra techniques and ninja powers, as those didn't seem to be hurt by a lack of body memory. Naruto had real trouble reinventing himself. It was not that he couldn't think of other types of ninja, but that he'd always been aiming to be Hokage, and a cage-level ninja couldn't afford any major weaknesses. Weaknesses like, having genin-level martial arts. Still, he didn't give up hope that he could improve them eventually. It just wasn't going to happen during this time loop thingy. After that, he could go forward with his original plans to impersonate Sasuke to get people to teach him. He'd just have to be more careful not to get caught doing it, as he didn't want to be a cage-level missing ninja. No, that was sounding too risky. Maybe he could somehow arrange to find a person who was willing to teach him despite being a demon container. That would prove better in the long run. But that was getting distracted from his immediate goals. A Hokage had to be strong in many areas, and martial arts was only one. He could and would deal with that later. For right now, there were plenty of other weaknesses he could be working on improving with the opportunities at hand.